What if the monsters of old legends weren't entirely made up? We often treat myth like it belongs purely in storybooks. But across eras and continents, people unearthed strange bones, witnessed unfamiliar beasts, and saw things that defied explanation. When faced with the unknown, myth was their way of making sense of fear, danger, and wonder. Today, paleontologists discover fossils that reshape what we thought of as impossible. Geneticists unlock stories encoded in DNA. Naturalists observe animals behaving in ways that once inspired dread. We know much more, but myth still whispers in bones and shadows. In this journey, we'll explore 8 creatures once thought mythical and trace the real living or extinct beings that likely inspired them. Prepare to see how legends of horror, wings, claws, or primal strength had roots in real life, and how human imagination built the rest. Far from Middle-earth, on the island of Flores in Indonesia, local legends tell of the Ebu Gogo, small, wild humanoids, hairy, mischievous, strange, always lurking in forests and caves. Ibu, in the Naj language, means grandparent, and Gogo, roughly one who eats anything. They were said to speak in mumbles, sometimes mimic speech, steal children or food, vanish into caves. To many, these stories were myth. But then in 2003, something incredible was discovered. Bones of Homo floresiensis, a real small-bodied human species that lived on Flores until roughly 50,000 years ago. Homo floresiensis stood about 1 to 1.1 meters tall, approximately 3.5 feet, with a brain size smaller than modern humans, yet capable of making stone tools, and living in a landscape shared by giant rats and dwarf elephants. The fossils were found in Liangbua Cave, along with several individuals and thousands of stone tools. The resemblance between myth and fossil is intriguing. The physical descriptions of the Ibu Gogo, small, human-like, somewhat wild, living in caves, seen in forest edges, match what scientists have learned of Homo floresiensis's environment and form. Folklorists suggest that these stories may have preserved distant memories, or imagination inspired by odd bones showing up, or even uneroded remains seen in shallow caves. However, Ebu Gogo legends say more than just physical traits. They speak of interaction, stealing, mimicry, angering neighbors. Some accounts mention the villagers offering palm fiber for clothes, seeing the creatures take it, then extinguishing them with firebrands. The stories have moral weight: respect human boundaries, protect children, be wary of wild places. On the scientific side, there's still debate. Exactly when Homo floresiensis disappeared, how tool culture developed, how isolated they were. Some hypotheses propose they descended from Homo erectus and underwent insular dwarfism, shrinking over centuries due to limited resources, no large predators, etc. One recent discovery, a small arm bone at Mata Menge, showed early Homo floresiensis fossils go back approximately 700,000 years. So, the Ibu Gogo myth isn't just fantasy. It appears to live on the thin border between folklore and fossil evidence. Myth shaped by memory, fear, wonder, and perhaps by real beings who once shared the island with our ancestors. Across many cultures, people have told stories of dragons or winged serpents, creatures with feathered wings, claws, reptilian snouts, roaring through the skies. In medieval manuscripts, in Asian folklore, in European bestiaries, dragons are often drawn with leathery wings, scales, and reptilian teeth, but sometimes with wings more bird-like. What if some of those dragon myths were shaped by something closer to a feathered creature? When people see giant tusks poking out of melting ice, or enormous bones long buried in permafrost, it's easy for stories of giants to spring up. Across Asia, Europe, and North America, legends speak of huge hairy elephants roaming frozen lands, beasts of myth preserved in snow. But this wasn't just imagination. The woolly mammoth, Mammotheus primigenius, was very real. These Ice Age giants lived across the northern hemisphere, in cold, steppe tundra environments. They had long, curved tusks, a thick woolly coat, a hump of fat for surviving winter, and adaptations for cold weather, such as small ears to reduce heat loss. Fossils and remains show they hovered between 2.7 and 3.4 meters at the shoulder, and weighed up to 6 to 8 tons in some cases. One of the most remarkable specimens is Lyuba, a baby mammoth calf discovered in Russia's Yamal Peninsula in 2007. Lyuba died about 42,000 years ago, and her body was preserved so well that skin, mother's milk in her stomach, and even her organs could be studied. Her discovery gives scientists a rare window into mammoth biology and how these creatures lived. Then there's the Yukagir mammoth, found in Siberia in 2002. with head, parts of limbs, and internal organs preserved in permafrost. From that find, researchers learned about how mammoths walked, their footpads, tusks, and more. The foot had cracks useful for gripping icy surfaces. These are not just bones, these are life stories frozen in time. Legends and myths about mammoth-like creatures survived in indigenous folklore. People found tusks or bones, encountered huge footprints, saw ivory tusks eroding from ice, and wove stories around them. Sometimes they called them giants, sometimes spirits. These myths were attempts to explain the enormous remains people uncovered. The physical evidence confirmed the stories were rooted in reality. More recently, science has pushed the boundary even further. Researchers are studying mammoth DNA, preserved in permafrost, reconstructing genomes, and exploring gene editing possibilities to recreate or mimic mammoth traits. Projects aim to bring traits like cold resistance and dense fur into resilient elephant populations, a hybrid mammophant idea. So, when myth speaks of hairy giants in snow, of beasts roaring across ice floes, it isn't pure fantasy. It is memory. It is bones. It is science slowly catching up to what people long believed. Enter Archaeopteryx lithographica, one of the most famous early feathered dinosaurs discovered in the late Jurassic limestone in Germany, about 150 million years ago. Archaeopteryx had a mix of traits: feathers like a bird, teeth and a long bony tail like a dinosaur, clawed fingers on its wings, and asymmetric flight feathers, all suggesting it could fly or at least glide well. Recent fossil studies have even confirmed new feathers, tertiary feathers, on some specimens, filling in gaps in what scientists know about how flight-capable Archaeopteryx was. Its feathers had structure essential for powered flight, not just display. That kind of morphology is striking. It mixes what we think of as bird and reptile in one creature. Another example, Ornithosaurus, a smaller relative among feathered theropods found in China, also preserved impressions of feathers. These weren't just down or fuzz. In some cases, they had more complex feathers on arms and tail, similar to bird feathers. So, how might this link up with myths? Imagine a fossil hunter or farmer discovering feathered bones or impressions. The find might show toothy jaws, clawed wings, and feathers. To a people without paleontology, that could look like a dragon, a winged beast. Then add local tales of serpents in the sky, of bird dragons, of beasts flying out of caves. It's a short jump from what's seen to legend. Feathered dinosaurs like Archaeopteryx and its relatives demonstrated traits that blur the lines between bird and reptile. The mix of flight feathers, claws, reptilian aspects, all give real biological grounding to stories of dragons with wings or feathered beasts of myth. Archaeopteryx didn't survive today, but its legacy persists, not just in fossils, but in the dragon stories people told long after its bones faded. The myth endures when nature once existed. So, what have we really uncovered? From ancient birds that once ruled the skies, to mammoths frozen in time, to deadly creatures mistaken for gods or spirits. Each of these myths started with something real: fossils, bones, strange sightings, and misunderstood behavior planted as seeds. Stories grew around them, and over centuries those stories became legends. But here's the truth. Myths don't come from nothing. They come from the edge of understanding, from real encounters with the unknown. The line between legend and reality has never been straight. Sometimes it bends, sometimes it blurs, and sometimes it leads us right back to the truth. So, if these myths were once real, what else might be? If you're as fascinated by that question as I am, don't just scroll on. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because we're just scratching the surface. There are still stories buried in stone, sleeping in ice, and drifting in deep water. And together, we're going to dig them up. Which of these creatures amazed you the most? Or which one would you fear facing in real life? Drop it in the comments, because this journey, it's far from over. The myths aren't gone. They're just waiting to be found.